Shotade Olusegun. In today's video, we're going to be reviewing a particular video titled The Art, the Mind, and Transcendence by Robert Lawrence Kuhn. So that video is what we're going to, you know, review in this particular video. Then after the whole video, I'm going to add my own opinion on that video. Now, before we watch that video, I want us to, dissect what I have, published in the past, because I'm going to be using scientific perspective to, dissect the whole video and then review the video for you. So I want you to know that I have a publication, scientific publication on the paper that I have right here, which is the time theory of the universe. Yes, you can see the journal right at the top, International Journal of Scientific and Engineering Research, IJSER, publication certificate, where I collected about 3 certificates from this journal, but I just want you to see this particular one. So now, based on the peer review judgment, you can see that the research is being highlighted and the significance of contribution. I have that to be 3 right here. It's a novel research discovery, and probably maybe because of the skepticism of the judges, so they just had to give it 3 right there. Now, the originality of content, yes, that is 4. Technical quality, that is 4. Then clarity of presentation, that is 4. So now the overall recommendation, you can see accept in current state, that is being highlighted right there. And then any additional comment, there is no additional comment. You can see that the paper was published in IJSER volume 12, issue 10, October 2021 edition. So now you can see the stamp, the signature, and everything right there. So this is just to let you know that the review that you are going to have on this particular video, which I want to review, or the judgment that I'm going to give, is going to be strictly based on scientific perspective, you understand. And with that, I'm going to use some diagrams to drive home my point. I'm going to use some diagrams. So now with that, I think I will be able to do justice to this particular topic, because the topic is a tough topic, quite insightful, you understand. So it has to do with art, mind, and anything that has to do with mind is actually beyond ordinary, you understand. So mind transcends our, should I call it, the dimension in which we domicile, you understand. So it goes beyond, and that is why I just want to be so careful with this topic. And I want to try as much as possible not to be biased in any way. So I want to give you the kind of judgment that you people will like. So basically, that is that about the publication, just to let you have this kind of laid back assurance that what I'm going to discuss here, I will try as much as possible to give you genuine judgment, you understand. So now, that is that about the publication. So right now, let's watch the video. So now, this is the video. But before we start watching the video, there are some things that I want to actually clarify. Now, the video, the title is The Art, Mind, and Transcendence. You know, talking about transcendence, it's something that is actually beyond, the dimension in which we domicile, you understand? So it's something that has to do with, how should I put it, like super intelligence, you understand? So in this video, we're going to see how we can get connected to that idea of, God being God being the intelligent mind, behind the creation of the universe. And basically, I'm going to use programs based on my novel research discovery to, do justice to this. So now, with no further ado, let's dive into it.
I've wondered about transcendence, a sense of existence or experience beyond the self. Transcendence is a driving motivation of closer to truth. Each of our pillar categories, cosmos, consciousness, meaning, goes beyond the self. What is it about transcendence that so intrigues us? Well, first, how is transcendence elicited? Religious experience, psychedelics, emotional high, creative high, runner's high? Transcendence is an expression, an intense expression of the mind. My lifelong passion is to understand the mind. Neuroscience, cognitive science, psychology, philosophy, these have been my ways for understanding. In recent years, Closer to Truth has been assessing art as a fresh way for understanding mind and meaning. So, since art can help us understand mind, and transcendence is an expression of mind, can art help us understand transcendence? Can we explore transcendence via art and mind? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my journey to find out. To assess whether, and perhaps how, art can help us understand transcendence, I need to assess linkages between mind, art, and transcendence. I hear of a conference on art seeking understanding, a long-term project of the Templeton Religion Trust. It's in Edinburgh, Scotland, so that's where I go. Attending are neuroscientists, cognitive scientists, social scientists, philosophers, art critics, theologians, all focused that can bring about transcendence. I should start by framing transcendence. I meet the director of the Cambridge Body, Mind, and Behavior Laboratory, experimental social psychologist Simone Schnall. Simone, the process from understanding the mind, then bringing in art as a modality, and then looking for transcendence as a goal. How do you reflect on that transformation?
We all lived through a pandemic, deaths, millions of deaths around the world and so on. Something that has affected every single person on the planet. One thing to come out of it could actually perhaps be positive in the sense that it has refocused people thinking about, well, what matters in life? The appreciation that life is short. And how are you going to live a life? A good life. So then what are good ways of getting people to engage with these questions in the right way? Well, perhaps these kinds of aesthetic experiences we've been exploring, a sense of beauty, a sense of captivated by something that is greater than you are, that's more important than you are as a person.
This transition from mind to art to transcendence, is this a circular kind of path that art kind of acts as this trigger or this facilitator that gets mind to transcendence, and then with the transcendence we can better understand the mind?
I think that's a very interesting idea. You mentioned the mind. So what we're looking at is in terms of thinking, cognitive processes, and so on. But if one goes beyond that, well, why do we have a mind? I mean, based on evolution, human beings have evolved to do a lot of thinking because it was useful in some way. And typically it encourages appropriate action, appropriate behavior. So then the question is, in this context, well, what do people do as a consequence? Are these aesthetic experiences just influencing the mind and what people do when they sit around and think and talk? Or does it actually compel them to act in different ways?
If we were sitting here, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years from today, looking back on our explorations of mind, art, and transcendence, what would be findings or results that we could discuss?
Maybe we could get rid of the term art and just replace it with something that's more democratic, perhaps, or more engaging, to think of it as an experience that just happens to be one instantiation of aesthetic appreciation, of a certain qualitative experience that we might have of different kinds across everyday life all the time. Or let's open up these kinds of experience to the widest number of people possible. And perhaps the research can contribute to say that, well, this is really something that's worth doing.
So what would be the kind of research that would give you confidence to say that?
Well, one would have to show that appreciating art is similar in terms of the outcomes as, let's say, appreciating beautiful nature, beautiful landscape. Churches, in fact, are perfect examples of beauty, of environments that feel very special on an emotional level, visceral level, perhaps even. And to say that, well, all these things have in common that they engage the person, they engage their minds in ways that maybe can be cultivated in a museum when you put up famous paintings, but could also be cultivated in many different ways.
To Simone, that disruption and death can elicit reflection on the larger questions of life is itself a kind of transcendence. And other such reflections, such as on beauty and on meaning beyond the self, collectively compose the essence of transcendence. Is this an opening for art? That churches exemplify strikingly beautiful environments elicits wonder. What makes spaces sacred? I ask an architect who studies sacred spaces and spirituality through the lens of phenomenology and the discoveries of neuroscience, Julio Bermudez.
I see architecture and the arts as fundamental tools that we, humanity, developed to assist in the apparently impossible task of engaging the metaphysical. So here you have the most physical of all the artifacts that we, humanity, have created, buildings that function as bridges to engage the most metaphysical, the most esoteric, the most immaterial, ethereal component. And yet, the miracle is possible. So to me, it's fascinating how to do it. And I think that's really the task of architecture and the arts.
What are some specific examples of how that works?
We could look at the aesthetic nature of architecture, for instance, of the arts, that because of its incredible, compelling symmetry or composition, of materialization, of craftsmanship, or scale, or the capacity of reverberating music, for instance, to enter in this absorption, this transcending, inviting condition in which we forget ourselves and we enter in this special relationship. When you look at the human condition, one of the things we face immediately is a question of death and the question of how we make meaning in this world. When we figure something out or we find some explanation, what we want to do is to transfer or communicate that to our fellow human beings. So we do that in architecture and the art. This is how we find signification of your life, our life. This is how we explain death. This is how we find meaning in this otherwise existentially challenging life.
And you're doing that through architecture.
Yes, these are pointers. These are pointers to the ultimate question of humanity. So architecture is creating artificial environment, a construct that through its layout, through its materiality, through its engaging of light and more, invite us to states of mind that make us forget ourselves and enter in relation to something transcendental.
It might seem counterintuitive. The most physical of human artifacts, buildings, bridges to engage and communicate the most metaphysical, the most esoteric of human thought, the transcendental. But why does such physicality reveal the transcendent, not limited? The nexus of transcendence, art, and mind. How then to use art and mind to enrich understanding of the transcendent? A traditional way, but not the only way, is with theology. I ask an expert in theology and the arts, Judith Wolf.
I suppose there are two directions from which one could approach the question of mind, art, and transcendence. One, from the perspective of reality and transcendent reality, if there is such a thing, and how it might manifest itself through art to the mind. And then, of course, the other, the opposite direction, in which we investigate what the structures of our mind are that may or may not be necessary to engage with transcendence, if there is such a thing, or if we're pessimistic, which throw up the illusion of transcendence even when there isn't any.
And how art is a vehicle to intervene in that and intensify that process.
Exactly. So my work is much more interested in the ways in which art both probes and cultivates structures and habits of our mind, which are relevant to the question of what we experience as transcendence. And I'm perfectly open to both outcomes that we find through our investigation of mind and art, that transcendence is an illusion that's habitually thrown up by the mind, or that there really are capacities of our mind that are opened by art to something that might manifest itself to us.
Is there any way that you can adjudicate between those two positions?
I don't think that from within the structures of our mind we can adjudicate between those two. And that is in some sense an important concept in my work. And my sense is that our engagement with even a felt presence of God or a sense of the divine always functions through our ordinary processes of mind, including our imagination, our desire, and so forth, and that they're valenced differently for us. That when we imagine the presence of God, we are imagining it in such a way, not that, we're inhabiting Middle Earth imaginatively or talking to an imaginary friend that we know not to be real, but that these processes are responding to something that's out there, but obviously we can't know from within ourselves whether we're responding to something out there, whether that is there, because the processes are the same as in projection. And so we need other ways of investigating.
And so therefore, what can art tell us about transcendence?
I think art is a wonderful middle thing that both makes us conscious of our own imaginative or projective investment in what we're seeing, because art always gives us incomplete or incongruous information that we invest with our own memories, with our own meanings, with our own desires, and so forth. But on the other hand, art is also something that's intentionally created by an artist with a vision that will often expand our understanding of the connection between things, the meaning of things. It will give us a greater depth of perception than we could achieve by ourselves. And so it does bring something to us, but it also elicits something from us. And it can therefore serve as a testing ground for both of those directions, in a sense. The knotty question of the strict separation or not between material and immaterial aspects of reality is something that art precisely speaks to, because very often, particularly in, let's say, modern expressionist art, we are confronted with a series of lines that do not make sense on the purely material plane. Think of Picasso's Weeping Woman, which has these strange contortions. Literal plane only makes sense by a certain perception of depth. This woman appears broken because she is broken on the inside. In other words, art, particularly that kind of art, pushes us to, from an incongruity on the material level, to a depth perception. And that's precisely what theology often does. It sees incongruities in ordinary material life. For example, the inevitability of death and the ineradicable desire of love that life should be eternal. Then it may well be that that incongruity has to be resolved on a deeper level.
Judith approaches mind, art, transcendence from two directions.
Okay, so it is now time for me to, add my own opinion to it. Now, before I use the diagram, I just want to actually add some things right here. Art. Art is actually far beyond, what people can see. You understand? So I just want to touch on heart, touch on mind, then touch on transcendence before I start using diagram that can actually, drag my points home or drive my point home. So now art, it is far beyond what we can see because, for instance, if an artist wants to draw somebody, so if that artist is actually just looking at the outward appearance, only the outward appearance to do the drawing, then the artist will not be able to capture the entirety of that particular person that he wants to draw. So now, for instance, if you look at the Mona Lisa drawn by Leonardo da Vinci, what makes that painting to be so unique is for the fact that Leonardo da Vinci was able to capture the entirety of the story, the entirety of what the image, what the painting is all about. What do I mean by that? Now, apart from the outward appearance or apart from the physical representation of the person that the artist wants to draw, there is this underlying meaning to the experience or, to the expression of that particular person at that present phase in time. And that expression, the underlying meaning of the expression that constitute the person in that present phase, that will be the combination of the past and the future of the person. So what we have as the present phase is the vertical combination of the past and the future. And once you can capture that, then you'll be able to capture the entirety of the story. So the uniqueness in the Mona Lisa is for the fact that when people are, looking at that Mona Lisa picture, the smile of that painting is inviting. And it's as if it is alive. That is what we're talking about, genuine art. When you can pay attention to details, to the extent that you are able to get the precision of the arrangement in such a way that you have a seamless arrangement that is void of traces of any mark. That is genuine art that captures the entirety of the story. So for instance, we human beings, we know that we often glow with this infrared light. So we're not limited, the entirety of human being is not restricted to the physical representation. So we have this glowing light around us that if you drill down to that level, then you'll be able to get more information about that same person. And another thing is, this universe as we have it is a storytelling formation. It's a storytelling formation because we have this emergence of the past, the present, and the future. And universe itself has the story that it's telling. Where actually I elucidated on that story of the universe in one of my uploads. So if you are interested in that, you can actually get that. So now mind. There is something about mind which, it gives us that sensation of not it gives us that sensation of more than who we are. And that is why people often say that the mind is not within our body, that it transcends, the entirety of our beings. You understand? So basically, with your mind, you can actually imagine to be in the present phase, even though you are not there physically. You can go into the future by the power of imagination, and you do that with your mind. And as well, you can actually recollect things that have been recorded in your memory as, the past events. So basically, the mind is so powerful that it can actually, empower us to travel into the past and then travel into the future. So we actually time travel, even though we can't time travel physically. You understand? So with mind, we can do all those things. Then transcendence. Transcendence is just that virtue of connecting to the something at higher dimension, and then having that integration of that particular thing as a slight introduction that gives sensation of being conscious of that particular thing. So definitely these are the three key things, but I just want us to have idea of these key three things that I want to shed more light on in this particular video. So now let's go to the diagram that I want to use. So okay, so now this is the diagram. Well, this is just one of the diagrams that I want to use. And when you look at the title says number pattern. Number pattern. I want to start with this because when it comes to art, how can we, how can we name art? How can we define it? Is it something that is it something that has to do with shapes? You understand? So basically, I'm going to, discuss this topic based on scientific perspective, just like I said. There is this novel research discovery, the one I showed you that I did the publication. Actually, there are two. So, seeing the anatomy of quantum gravity through formula of everything. Now, with these two theories, I was able to, nail the fact down that the virtue of being conscious is actually beyond the limit of the substrate dimension. So we usually have this interconnectivity between dimensions. And so for the two dimension, which is a substrate dimension, to the higher dimension of 3D to be conscious of itself, it has to be connected to that higher dimension. An example of that is this. If you have a plain paper on the floor, if there is an ant on that, the ant will not be able to cross the border or the edges of the paper in order to explore the other side, because the other side is actually placed on the floor. But the moment you lift up that paper, the 2D paper, then you have made it to move into the higher dimension, which is 3D. And it's until then that the ant can actually cross the border and explore the other side. So what that is telling us is that the substrate dimension has to be connected to the higher dimension for it to harness the fullness of its potential. And that is ideal. That is so essential. You will be able to see this even in that application of formula of everything, because in that first scientific publication, I derived the formula called formula of everything. And in the second research publication, I applied the formula, and then from there, we're able to move from the classical mechanics down to quantum mechanics. Now, getting to quantum mechanics, then I realized that reality is not even feasible at quantum mechanics, at quantum level. So it transcends into the higher dimension, and so I call the whole thing complex system. So before then we must have this standing wave that will be projected into the higher dimension, that we connect to the electron of the higher dimension. Don't forget that by traveling into the higher dimension, then we have higher degree of freedom and power. And with that, the electron of that higher dimension can be instantiated. And by connecting to that, instantly that electron will be converted to positron. And so by having that to be positron, then the electron of the substrate dimension will be instantiated. Then the instant feedback of that to the classical mechanics, that is the objective conscious experience that we have. Without this objective conscious experience, which is so slight, conscious experience, because that introduction or that integration of that genuine information from the higher dimension is what we actually locate the classical object to quantum object, to locate their genuine places in the universe. And by having that, you have what is known as self-awareness. And then when you move further towards the core singularity of the black hole, there we have electron being suspended. We realize that the base value of electron will be decayed to 1.1, while the power will be intact. And so now we have this, fling forth and back effect right at the power level. So we have it being, moved to the power of negative 32 and power of negative 31. And also we have the base shifting like that. So that is synonymous to quasar-like signal. And that is what we have discovered with that formula of everything at the core singularity of the black hole. So now that black hole suspension will allow us to have genuine contact at the present phase, because that will relocate the classical mass worth to the intersection of vertical time trajectory to energy trajectory, where that classical mass was supposed to be. And once we have that, that is what I call subjective conscious experience. So that is just a brief explanation as what I want to shed light to in this particular video. So I want to discuss that, points that have been raised by, those who interviewed in that video. I want to actually expatiate on that. Now, the woman said something. He said art could serve as intermediary conveyor, something that can actually, get information from us to that transcendence and get information from the transcendence back to us. So there is this communication that we often have with the universe unknowingly. So that is what we're going to dissect. So I want to start with this image, and what you can see there, we have a shape which is known as equilateral triangle. So we have this shape by having this addition. So we have one, which is the topmost, which is at, the peak of the equilateral triangle. Then 1 plus 2, you can see that that base is being expanded a little bit. And the moment we have 1 plus 2 plus 3, we can see that the base is being expanded more and more. And that is how we have it till it reaches this baseline. So the idea is just to multiply from 1 to 10, not from 1 to 10, from 1 to 0. So basically, we know that we realize that by doing this, we have a pattern that involves equilateral triangle. Now, this equilateral triangle is so essential because by applying that formula of everything, yes, we have the emergence of equilateral triangle being nested right inside the curvature of time to energy. So if you have been watching my video, you'll be so conversant with this idea of time energy wave model. So I have time energy wave model, then I have formula of everything. Those are the two powerful tools that I use in my research publication to, drive home my point. Okay, so now by having this, what is this telling us? Having a shape is synonymous to art, because art is all about shape formation. When you are drawing something, you draw based on the shape of what you are drawing. So you don't just draw, you try to draw to get the exact shape. And if you can draw it so brilliantly, then you'll be able to capture not only the physical representation of the person you're drawing. If you can drill down into the underlying meaning of the title of the person you are drawing, then you'll be able to capture the entire story. And it's only when you capture the entire story that you can actually make that masterpiece. The masterpiece, that is when you can have that aesthetic worth of that art in existence. That is when you can bring it to life, that it becomes a masterpiece. So that is what. So now the thing is this: when you have shape, we're referring to art. And basically, when you look at what we have right here, I want you to look at the extreme diagonal end of this equilateral triangle. You can see that we have one being repeated like 10 times. That is a constancy. Now you see what I have right here, expanding phase by constancy. We have constancy to elongate process. It sustains process. And that is why constancy is so essential. We have this in mathematics, we have it everywhere. Then when you look at the extreme right side of the equilateral triangle, you see that we have variations. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to the 0. So now, by having this variation, we have contracting phase by variations. So this, what I'm trying to illustrate, it might not be clear to you at first glance, but when you give this shape cursory look, then you'll be able to understand what I'm trying to say. If you just look at this shape, the way we have that 1, 2, 3, you see it's a kind of progression, and to you it might not be sensible to say it is contracting. You understand? So, and then it might not also be diagonally right from the constant phase, the expanding phase. If you look at the ones that we have, if you count, it's going to be 10. So you have that to be 10, and that is somehow, tally with the 0 that we have. So we only have the 0 once. But then if you look at these two diagonally, you have it 9 times. And that, by having that 9 times, you can see that you have the 9 2 times. So we have this kind of relationship with these numbers. as we have them diagonally. But when you look at it that way, you can see the contracting pattern. So if you move to the 3, you have it 8 times. That is related to the 8, which you can only see it occurring 3 times. Then if you move to 4, you have it 7 times. And when you look at the 7, you have it 4 times. So we have this kind of relationship, and you can see that contracting pattern. So if you are to observe that diagonal right from the right to the left, you can see the expanding pattern. So now it's only ideal for us to dissect this equilateral triangle diagonally, because that is only how it can make sense for us to see that contracting and expanding pattern. Now, we often have this expanding phase and contracting phase in the whole universe. The cosmological space is actually expanding. The black holes are actually contracting. The cells are actually expanding by doubling. And when you look at the doubling phase, the doubling progression, you have it in exponential form. And then there is this contraction as well that we actually, give the solid convergence to that cell. You understand? So we often have expansion and contraction in the universe. You understand? And that is why it is not a surprise for us to have it in this pattern that we have. So by having this pattern, we can see the emergence of art right there. And then by having this number, the way we have it, it's telling us that even though we have this equilateral triangle to be symmetric, there is this underlying interpretation of it that it is not symmetric, but rather asymmetric. Because having constancy at extreme left side in relation to that varied contraction that we have at the extreme right, you can see it is asymmetric, and that is what I discovered by applying that formula of everything. That's what I discovered. So this will give you an idea of what you will have to come across in the next diagram that I will show you. So now when you look at the extreme right, you can see that we have 1, 3, 6, 10, 15, 21, 28, 36, 59. Those numbers, they are the numbers that, constitute triangles. But there is something so profound. When you look at it, we have 1, that is odd number. Then we have 3, it's also odd number. When you look at this, you have that odd number and even number alternating at 2 instances. So 1, 3, odd number, 6, 10, even number, 15, 21, odd number, 28, 36, even number, 45, which is the baseline of the 9, odd number. So by adding 0, we have another 49. We can just start that to be an inverse of the baseline of 9. So that is minus 45. And with that, there is possibility for us to actually have an inverted equilateral triangle to that. So in the universe, we always have this flipping mechanism. And that flipping mechanism is everywhere. And I'm going to show you the time energy wave model for you to see for yourself. So the flipping mechanism is the signature of Almighty God. And by having that flipping at the higher dimension to constitute the complex system, which will be integrated into substrate dimension for us to have conscious experience, it's another thing entirely. And with that alone, you can get to know that there is this possibility and feasibility of transcendence, and then there is this possibility of the movement beyond the substrate, and then there is this possibility of equilateral shape, which is the art. So we have everything right there. Now if I'm to tell us what art, mind, and transcendence are, I will say art is the shape that is being formed by mass convergence, which we can see with our eyes. And then I would say mind is the conveying vessel, from either classical level to quantum level and beyond, which we might not be able to see with our physical eyes, because this kind of conveying mechanism travels at the speed of light and it travels at the speed of time, not light. Time is instant by default. It is only when time is in relativistic scaling to energy that it becomes continuous. Then energy is discrete when in relationship with time. But by default, energy is infinite. Please have that at the back of your mind. So now with this alone, we can see that there is possibility for us to, in my video, I have this series on YouTube that I called Shotadiology series. Shotadiology has to do with the flipping mechanism of the universe. And it's a kind of flipping that has to do with art. Because there are two flipping mechanisms in the universe. There is this dimensional flipping mechanism, and there is this relativistic flipping mechanism. So the relativistic flipping mechanism has to do with, the convergence of worth. That is what I call scientific flipping mechanism. Why that dimensional flipping mechanism I call art, So I have this interconnectivity of art to science in that shotadiology anyways. So now, the thing is, I realize that there is no way we can actually, have formula of everything or have theory of everything without considering the classical mechanics. And the trajectory that will give us the solution at higher dimension will come right from the classical mechanics. That is synonymous to, being on earth. When you are on earth, you'll not be able to see the reality of things. You might even say that the earth is flat. But the moment you travel away from the earth into the space to a certain distance, you'll be able to see the entirety of the earth's shape. And with that, you can say earth is spherical. So earth is not flat. But then if you travel further into the space, such that earth becomes a tiny spot, we can actually liken that to the quantum mechanics or quantum level. In relativity to where you are, you can liken that to classical mechanics or classical level. Because you'll not be able to be ascertained of, the components of the heart of the earth at that point in time. But let's say you now move further into space such that earth is out of your sight. We can actually liken that to complex mechanics or complex level, relative to where you are in the space. So basically, if we were to reconnect to the earth, because earth is out of sight, we will need to travel instantly to where earth is. That is the only way we can, get to reconnect to earth at its exact position. What do I mean by that? As you're moving away from the earth, what do you observe? You observe that the earth as well is moving away from you, because there will be this central emergence between you and the object you are moving away from. And then it will seem as if you are moving away from each other at equal speed. So that is it. That is relativity. The moment relativity is in place, then you are moving away from the earth as earth is also moving away from you. So even though that earth at complex level, it is somewhere in the space. And if you are trying to move towards it, you can never get it at its exact position because it will also be moving towards you. So that is the contracting phase. You understand? So basically, that is the fact about that. And so now let's try and dissect, the other image. Which, okay, I want to use this diagram to, explain that transcendence. So basically, this is the diagram that we have here is the time energy wave model. Now, the blue curvature is the time trajectory, while the red curvature is the energy trajectory. By applying formula of everything, we're going to have the emergence of this equilateral triangle. So now, this particular sketch is all about the functional information. Now, real, the, the true message here is that there is no way we can have a functional information without having an intelligent mind behind it. So if I'm to use AI, for instance, people do talk about evolution, evolution, evolution. Evolution is not feasible because how can you say that things can actually evolve without being directly arranged? How can you say dinosaurs can actually be transformed to birds? Of course, there will be new futures. There will be new futures that must be developed to have that in place. But now, the simple question I want to ask to disprove evolution is, if truly evolution is possible, why is it that evolution is not able to evolve AI before humans decided to program AI to a certain point where later they now have this learning mechanism and they don't know what AIs are up to again? Why is it that evolution can't just develop AI before humans intervention to develop it? So there is, before anything can actually come into existence, it must have been arranged, it must have been programmed by an intelligent mind. And for us to have AI being developed by humans, it's a typical example. In fact, it's a genuine example that we can use to nullify evolution completely. So basically, functional information, let's see how I define it. I define functional information as so now let's see. I define functional information as something that quantifies the complexity of a system's function to perform a useful task or provide necessary insight for a specific objective. So basically, I have a video on this functional information. If you want to know more about it, you can actually, get to my YouTube channel and download that. So by then having this proof for intelligent mind, then it means that we know that transcendence is something that is feasible. And by that consciousness that I discussed earlier on, it's a virtue that we get from higher dimension. And so we should always know that all these things are possible because we usually have this intuitive idea right from higher dimension. It is not something that we have at our disposal. At times, you might just have to sit down be observing some things, and before you know it, the idea will come. It will drop, and you will be conscious of that, and you work on that. It becomes something big. You understand? So that is that about it. Consciousness is something that is emergent at the present phase. You understand? It is, and it happens as we move on. So it happens as we have the expansion of the universe, it happens as we have the contraction of the universe. So basically, the solution of formula of everything is the discovery of this static and undulating field, which is synonymous to this central trajectory. You understand? So, and it's ideal for us to have that static and undulating field, because when you have a field that is propagating outwards, as we have in the cosmological space, then it is only ideal to have a point where that propagation will be static, in order for us to have an inverse of that as what we have in the black holes. So that is it. So now, with this, you can see that there is possibility for us to have, the instantiation of worth as art, because art, it's a tangible thing that you can relate with. You understand? So basically, that tangible thing that you can relate with is a product of intelligent mind. For instance, if you have idea of drawing somebody, so that drawing will not be in existence without being backed by your intelligence. So you observe the person you want to draw, then you follow the shapes as it ought to be to draw the person effectively as it ought to be. And then you have that as a tangible object to relate with. So now the Mona Lisa, for instance, is now a masterpiece that people can relate with. But once it was in the mind of Leonardo da Vinci. You understand? And so Leonardo da Vinci brought it to life by, carving it out from his mind, by painting it out from his mind. And then it becomes something we can all relate with. And then for Leonardo da Vinci to have drawn that perfectly in such a way that we can classify it as a masterpiece is another thing, because the intuitive idea wouldn't have come from him. So it will have come from the higher dimension, and that is the transcendence. So that is how I can link art, mind, and transcendence together. So I believe the video is quite, informative. If you enjoy the video, don't hesitate to smash like button. Then don't hesitate to connect to me on YouTube, subscribe to my channel so as to be updated for the subsequent uploads. Then I will put link to my research publication in the description below. You can, drill down into that description section to see that research publication for yourself. So it's a research publication that has unified quantum mechanics to classical mechanics, and by applying that formula, it's a powerful formula that feeds back on itself, and when you reiterate it, we're going to get the quasar-like signal, which is synonymous to what we have in the core singularity of the black hole. So it's a powerful formula. So that formula with the time energy wave model, that has solved the huge problem in the physics. So now we have bridge. You can see that by having the vertical trajectory being elongated by energy, that has served as a bridge, for this whole blue area, that is the classical realm. This down area is the quantum realm. So that is that. Thank you for your time. I believe the video is quite interesting. So with that, I think we have more intuitive interpretation of art in relation to mind and transcendence. So basically, there is a point where art and science is connected. Yes, you see the whole thing. I said there are two flipping mechanisms in the universe. You have relativistic flipping mechanism that has to do with science. You have the dimensional flipping mechanism that has to do with art. So the thing is, for instance, when you have a peg being dropped in a pond, you are going to have the wave-like formation. So that what you have that you can relate with is the art. The wave pattern that you have is as a result of, the wave pattern that you have as a physical entity you can relate with is the art. But then the underlying mechanics of that wave formation is far beyond the physical representation. That is where the science comes in. So that is that. Art, science, they are connected. So that's all for this live session. Thank you.